guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 11 of our roll top desk build. Okay, well, as I said at the end of last week, at the end of part 10, when the desk was all built, I said I was going to get into part 11, showing some of the finishing techniques that I'm going to use. It's nothing special, guys. It's not rocket science what I'm going to do here. And as well, we're going to discuss about the plans. So if you're not interested in hearing about discrepancies in the plans or seeing a very short video clips of me brushing on finish, etc., then maybe you might want to skip this week's show. But either way, we're going to start with the finishing, and for starters, what we're going to do is we're going to remove all of our hardware. So before we can start the sanding process and the finishing process for this desk, you want to remove all of your hardware. We don't want it getting damaged from the sanding, whether it be from hand sanding or from power sanding. Either way, remove all the hardware, and I've got a box here. Take all of your mounting screws that you're going to remove, put them back in that specific handle, and then put it in a box and put it aside for later installation. Once we get all the hardware removed, we want to remove all of the drawers, and I would inspect them at this point in time, like I'm doing right now, for pencil marks. Because I have seen on some of the inner surfaces of the drawers the original marks from the dovetails that didn't get sanded off. And for that, we're going to use a half-decent eraser and just erase those marks. We're not going to try to sand them off. I've found that sanding off pencil marks, because the pencil can indent or kind of go deeper than the surface, you end up sanding off more material than what you really want. So just go around and inspect all your drawers as well as the entire desk for any old layout marks that you may have on there, and get rid of them with an eraser before you start sanding. Alright, so with all the hardware removed and put into a box to be safe, with all of the mounting screws placed back in the handle so that nothing gets lost, we now need to work on sanding the pieces. And I'm going to start with the drawers, and the reason I'm starting with the drawers is because I absolutely hate doing them. So I'm going to get those over with, but I want to touch on a few things as far as sanding goes when it comes to these front faces of our drawers. Well, here we have one of our smaller drawers of the desk, and the one thing I want to point out here when sanding is this sharp, crisp edge that's all along here and along the edges of your drawer. We want to soften those. You can really get a nasty cut on this, and these are going to be a high traffic area. It's the drawer faces. So we need to soften those sharp edges in sanding. Now, in order to soften it, don't go crazy. You don't need to take your sandpaper and do I'm using it backwards. You don't need to do 500 passes over and across and round it over. That's not what softening it is all about. You can feel this sharp edge here, and all it takes to soften this is from side to side. That's it. That's it. A few little passes. Don't go crazy and get this rounded over. You just want to soften that and take that sharp edge off. So on each of the drawers, you're going to want to do it on all 8 corners. There'll be 4 on the inside edges and 4 on the outside. And as well, I would do it around the perimeters of the top faces of your drawers as well. Also, all of your routings here, although we did sand them before, you're going to want to give these a hand sanding, and the flat surfaces, I'm going to power sand them with a 1/4 sheet sander. And we're going to take everything on these drawers down to a 220 grit. As well, one other important thing to point out, I shouldn't have to, but I'm going to. Guys, dust mask, get one on. As well, for the bottoms, they're not glued in place. So they will rattle, and it's a fairly tight-fitting dado, but with the sanding vibration, it is going to rattle, and I have to tell you, it's deafening. At least for me it is. So for my liking, hearing protection. So you're going to have your safety glasses, your dust mask, and some hearing protection. Get all of the drawers sanded, and then we can put them aside and move on to the actual desk. Well, all of the drawers are sanded, as is the entire cubbyhole section. That's all been sanded to a grit of 220 as well. Now, here comes the next part, which is a bit of a pain in the neck, but we need to take the desk apart. Things like the desk top, the writing surface, if you will, you're going to want to seal that top and bottom so that you're sealing in that wood as much as possible, and you need to give it a sanding, and you really can't sand it while it is together. So although we did give it initial sandings as it was being built, I'm going to disassemble this whole thing, removing the top, removing the tambour, etc., and sand each one of the pieces individually. It's also going to help us get it inside the house because this thing weighs a ton. So I don't think you need a video. You saw 10 shows of me putting it together. I'm sure you can figure out how to take the top off and how to take the tambour out of it. Well, it almost seems a shame to spend 10 episodes of the show building it just to tear it apart. But it's a necessary evil. And we're going to continue with this. And now that we have the top separated from the base, we have the tambour section separated, the tambour's out, etc., sand it all down to 220 grit. You don't need a video of me with a sander in hand. Sand it all to 220 grit, and when we come back, we are going to talk about the dust removal from our sanded pieces. We've got all the desk components and the desk itself sanded to 220 grit, and I've removed it from the dusty environment of the shop and actually brought it into the house. The next step is to remove the dust from all the pieces. Now you can use compressed air. There's several methods that you can use. You want to check what type of sealer that you're going to be using, because for mine I'm using a water-based sealer, and because of that it is not recommended to use tack cloth. So what we're going to do with this project is use a slightly damp cloth and remove all the dust from all the surfaces of our desk, and then from there we can start to apply the sanding sealer. Well, I've got a cloth and I've got a mister bottle. You don't want to soak this and get it too wet and end up having to sand it down again because you've raised the grain with the water. So just give it a little mist, just enough to hold the dust as you wipe it down, and give the whole desk a really good wiping to get the dust off of it before you apply your sanding sealer. So with water-based sanding sealer, you don't really have much working time. So you want to get your coat applied rather quickly, but you don't want to overwork it. So basically, get it on there quick. Once you have it applied, just clean up the brush strokes by doing one full length with the tip of your brush end to end, and that should clean up any of your brush marks and allow the sanding sealer to level out. And just like I said, once you get it applied and you're happy with the coating, just using the tip of your brush, one stroke side to side running with the grain just to even it out and give it a chance to level. And then we'll just let this fully cure. So the sanding sealer is dried overnight, and before you apply your first coat of varnish, you want to sand it with 400 grit sandpaper. Now you don't want to sand the crap out of it, you just want to take away the roughness, any of the grain that's raised. You just want to take that away and rough it up a little bit so that the varnish has a chance to adhere. You might also notice in the background I've got all of these slats. Well, that actually is the tambour, which has been disassembled, and each individual piece has been coated with sanding sealer. So everything on the desk now will get sanded with 400 grit sandpaper, and then we're going to apply the varnish. And of course, just like we did before, you want to remove the dust off of the desk with a damp cloth. Again, don't soak the cloth. Just a little spray with a mister bottle will do you. I'm using a water-based satin finish varnish for the final coatings of this desk. So it's the same process as what you did with the sealer. Your working time is minimal due to the water base of the product, but you need to get it spread on there quick, even out the coat, and then just let it go, let it level out on its own. Just check for runs and drips to make sure you're not getting any. I don't think we need a video of it. I will pan away and show you the varnish that I'm using. And it's up to you what you want to use. Just make sure that you're reading the package directions to make sure that there's nothing special about the application of your product. So I'm going to apply it. There's nothing special, same process as before, and I'll see you when I get it coated up. We'll just show you where I'm at this point in time, and what we've got is 2 coats of sanding sealer and 2 coats of our satin finish varnish. And the important thing to remember here is sanding with 400 grit between each coat. You're not power sanding, guys. It's just hand sanding, just to rough it up a bit and take off any little pieces of dust or lint that may have fallen into the finish. So I'm going to do one more coat on this, and then we will call the finish on this project complete, and we just have to reassemble. Just for the record, don't kid yourself and think this is going to be a quick process. It's about 5.5 hours per coat on this desk with all of the little trim pieces and drawer faces, etc., etc. So give yourself plenty of time to work with it. Well, the desk is done and the finish is dried. It's been in use now for probably a couple weeks. What I wanted to do next was just go through a couple of the features of the desk. Now, you may not call these features, but I'm going to show you some things that I've added to it that I think enhance the whole project, and you can make the decision as to whether or not that's what you want it to do. So why don't we head inside and have a look at the desk. Well, as I said, I just want to point out a few features of the desk now that it's actually in use. And the first thing I want to show you guys is one of my favorite additions to this desk, and it's something that you may want to consider. What I've done is I have added LEDs to the light, or to the desk. I've placed light strips up in top here, with one shining directly down and one shining out on a 45 degree, as well as a smaller unit down in here with a wireless control where I can lower or raise the brightness of the LEDs depending on the needs at the time. And what this does, for me anyway, is it completely illuminates my desktop and gives me the ability to work at the desk without taking up valuable desk space with a lamp. So one of the features, of course, for me, LED lighting. Another feature that I have added to all of the small cubby drawers that are in this desk is thick red felt in the base of each drawer. And I just think it gives not only a little bit of padding down in here, but it also gives a splash of color, and I think it looks pretty classy when all of the drawers have that little lining of felt in them to give it that extra bit of color. So again, something you may want to consider for your build, lining your drawers with a little bit of thick felt. The next feature that I wanted to point out actually has to do with the filing drawer. And what I've done for the filing drawer is I've taken some 5/64 steel rod and I've polished it, and I've drilled a hole right through the side of the desk, both at the front and further back, to coincide with hanging files. And now the filing drawer is usable with a custom hanging file system here, and I didn't have to purchase one commercially, which would take up extra room in the drawer. So by hanging these rods the way that I have and driving them right through the drawer, I've now saved some space in the drawer for the hanging files and made the desk completely usable for those hanging files, which is what the drawer was intended for in the first place. Now, the last feature of the desk is one that I kind of hemmed and hawed about showing, and that would be one of the secret compartments. And the only reason I want to show you this is just to give you guys the idea that with a little bit of imagination, you can really turn this desk into something unique. And what we have is all of our drawers here, of course, on the sides of our desk here, and on this left side, just like the other side, we have a total of 6 drawers, and there's nothing special about them. They have various items in them, of course, but if you remove 2 drawers just like that and give this a little tug, you can see here that what we have is another section of drawers here where, I don't know, you can hide maybe some licorice that you're not really supposed to be eating because your cardiologist wouldn't be happy with you. But hey, you know what? It's my secret compartment. I'll hide whatever the heck I want in it. But there you go. There is a one of the secret compartments of this drawer, 2 nicely felt lined areas. And when you're done with it and you have your secret stuff in there, like your licorice in my case, then you just put it back together, slide your drawers in place, and they disappear. Just to give you an idea, guys, that use your imagination and anything is possible. I'm going to go back to eating my licorice now. Now, with those few features of the desk pointed out, obviously they're optional, and obviously it's up to you. It's your desk, it's your build. I did want to touch briefly on the plans, and I don't want to get too deeply into it because now that there's a new version out since I got involved, I don't know what version you're going to have, and I don't want to start correcting measurements for you only to find out, or for you to find out that, what's this guy talking about? These measurements are right on here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to head to the shop, and we're going to go through the plans. I'm going to show you the 2 versions that I have just briefly, and I just want to point out a few things of what you should be looking for when trying to find errors so that you don't make some of the mistakes that I ended up almost making by not checking dimensions. Why are you still here? Go away, I'm eating licorice. Go to the shop. Go see the guy out there. Well, I want to touch a bit on the plans, and I don't want to go crazy with it and say this measurement is wrong and this measurement is wrong, etc., etc. only because there's more than one version out there now. The way the story goes is initially at the beginning of this build, when the problems started to arise and I started to see the discrepancies in the measurements, I emailed the company. And at first they replied to me with, we understand your concerns. We're going to send it to our quality control department, etc., etc. And I thought, here we go. This is the typical brush off. Because they think they're talking to some no-nod that has no clue of what he's speaking of. Well, it took a couple weeks, but they did get back to me and did in fact confirm that the measurements that I was questioning were actually incorrect and that there was some discrepancies. And with looking through the plans, I can understand how this would happen, where the person who would have designed this desk may have had the knowledge of the woodworking and the knowledge of rail and style. They would have made the drawings in a certain way, but the fact-checking department may not have that same knowledge. So when they check the measurements, they are strictly going by mathematical means. So they're not understanding that the joints actually sink 3/8 of an inch into each other on both sides. So they are seeing mathematical errors. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but in my head that makes sense, and hopefully I'll explain it a little bit once I finish chatting here. But the bottom line is they made corrections, and they did rush me out a new set of plans pretty much, within another couple weeks. Once they were done, they contacted me, said they'd made corrections, and I had a new set of plans at my door the next day. They also reimbursed me for my old plans, which was rather nice of them. But by that stage of the game, I was far enough into the build and I had made enough corrections on the prints myself that I didn't really need their new prints. Either way, they were very accommodating. I can't say anything negative about it because they did, jump at the opportunity to change things. And afterwards, I did contact them to say, you know what, there are still a few discrepancies, and if you'd like, I could sort of point them out to you. And I was basically told we want to keep it in-house, and we want to keep it so that we have control of our quality, control of this set of plans. I'm not going to even comment on that. But I don't want to get too much into this measurement is wrong and this measurement is wrong because I don't know what version you have. But what I will do is just briefly, we're going to head over to the bench. I'm going to show you these two sets of plans, and I'm just going to point out what it is that you should look for. Well, this is a lot of printed material, and on the left over here we have the original set of plans, and on the right we have the revamped version that they have sent me. And the first thing that I want to point out between the two versions is that in the original one here, it is one page, whereas in the newer version, what they have done is provided 2 pages, and it's really gone a long way to cleaning up this drawing to make it a little easier to read. So kudos for that. The second page strictly contains the design and I guess the pattern for the sides of the upper desk, including the tambour track. And I have to say that there was a major design change when they did it in comparison from the first one to the second, whereas the second one had more slopes to it, and the newer one is more vertical, etc., etc. It's hard to explain unless you have both versions, and I really don't want to start getting into that comparison. But I did inquire to them as to why they made that change and never did get an answer. I didn't really expect one. But I just want to point out some of the changes here that they've done just so that you can have a look and know right away which version you have. I don't know if they're going to carry on with this 2-page version of the prints, or if they're going to combine it to one to reduce cost. But the first thing that I will point out, which you will know right off the bat which set you have, is the dimensions for the panels on the main print for the side panels of the lower desk. Now just ignore my scribbling, but we can see for the lower panels here, they're saying that we need 12 of them. There's 3 per panel, and they are all to be 6 1/4, with an asterisk, of course, to adjust to the fit of the frames. Again, depending on if you're just using an air gap or panel barrels as I did, that makes sense. But 6 1/4 by 11 7/8 long, again with the asterisks to adjust. Fair enough, I have no arguments there. 3 panels, all the same size. And yet when we look at the drawing, they're showing the dimensions here from side to side of these panels as being different. This one here at 6 3/8, this one here at 6 3/8, and this one here at 6 3/4. But if the cut list plan is showing them as all the same size with a 6 1/4 inch width for that panel, how does that work? How did this one suddenly stretch? It doesn't make any sense. So let's have a look at the new plans, how they've corrected or changed that. And here with the new set of plans, we can see that they still have the lower panels, 12 of them, which is correct. Again, 6 1/4 measurement by 11 7/8 with that asterisk to adjust to the fit of the frame. Fair enough, nothing different there, but on the plan, we now have a corrected measurement of 6 1/2, 6 1/2, and 6 1/2, which now makes a little more sense that these panels are now showing as equal, which is what they should have shown on the original drawing. Where they threw a 3/4 measurement in there, I really don't know, but they're showing equal measurements, and it coincides with your cut list of equal measurements there as well. So there you can see they have made the efforts to make the corrections on some of these discrepancies between your written instructions and your dimensions on the drawing. So now that I've shown you that little bit of information with those panels, the panels of the lower desk sides, you can tell very simply right off the bat and very quickly which version of the plans you have. If your dimensions of those 3 panels are different on your plans, then you have the older version, and you're going to want to be very careful with your dimensions. If you have a set of plans that has all 3 equal dimensions, then of course you have the newer set. Now I don't know if they're going to continue with this 2-page format or not, so that may not be the best way to tell. But you at least want to look at those dimensions, and you'll know right away which set you have. Just keep in mind with the rail and style joinery, for double checking any measurements, as I said in the rail and style joinery video that prefaced this build, the rails and the mullions are actually going to be cut 3/4 of an inch longer than what the exposed dimension of the piece is. And as I said in that video, the purpose for that is that your rail will sink into your style by 3/8 of an inch, just like that, so that they join together. That is the loss of that piece as far as the rail and style joinery goes. That's a standard. If you have something different in your bit set, then you need to make those adjustments to your dimensions. But there'll be 3/8 of an inch that sinks in from the rail to the style on each end, making the rail pieces and the mullions, which are basically your upright rails sort of thing, it makes them 3/4 of an inch longer than your exposed dimension. And these plans in the original version seem to have a real tough time. And it creates a lot of confusion because they got confused between exposed dimension and cut dimensions. And those dimensions never translated well for them over into the cut lists. And to be 100% honest, because I was further along in the build and really didn't need that cut list anymore and kind of veered off to do my own thing, I never really went through the new cut lists to verify. So you want to pay attention and check these things before you start cutting wood like crazy. Better to err on the side of caution and have a little bit longer piece and have to trim it and reroute it than what it would be to cut it short and then have an incorrect panel. So keep your eye on that, guys, for the rail and style joinery. There is one more thing of confusion that I want to clear up, and that would be in some of the, just one section of their descriptions of their pieces. And I'm going to take you over to the bench and show you that right now. Now, I touched on this problem during the build, and that it's a case of terminology. And this is for the upper desk sides, and you can see here that, as I pointed out earlier, they have, this style, this style, this style, this rail, this one here. This is not a style, it's a rail. And although it may be nitpicking, it's still an error. And if you're new to that type of joinery, then of course it could cause you some confusion. And here we can see that in the new set, they're still running upper rear style, front style, upper style, and lower rail. Now they've added an asterisk here on this one that you need noted pieces require shaping to final size. Well, that's all fine and dandy and sexy and all that, but if you're going by your dimensions and double checking that your rails need to be 3/4 of an inch longer than the exposed dimension on the plans, then well, you've got 3 sets of styles here and only 1 set of rails, so something is not correct. And this was one of the issues that I contacted them on to say I can continue to point out discrepancies, and they said, no, we want to keep this in-house. So obviously in-house needs to pick it up a bit and check not only dimensions, but terminology as well, so that someone who is not completely familiar with rail and style isn't totally confused and at a loss for what to do here. So again, something to keep in mind. Just don't let it confuse you. Work through it and you should be fine. All right, so the plans also point out that you are going to require 140 feet, board feet of red oak, if you choose that stock to build your desk out of. And that's great, but that's dressed lumber. So I made mine from rough cut, and in a perfect world, if I would have bought dressed lumber, okay, yeah, I could have gotten away with 140 board feet. I ended up actually purchasing 166 board feet of rough cut. And while I do have quite a bit of it left over, you have to remember that there's imperfections in the wood and things that you need to work around. There's waste and that sort of thing. So if you're on a tight budget on this desk, if you're buying rough cut, just keep in mind it's not 140 board feet of rough cut lumber, it's 140 board feet of dressed lumber. Just something to keep in mind, that you're probably going to be around the 160 to 170 board feet of rough cut if that's the route that you're going. Guys, I don't want to get into specific dimensions here because there is a few more discrepancies, and I don't know what they're going to change with this or how far they're going to take this. So I don't want to give you a dimension and then you check your plan and you say, what's this Kenny guy talking about? This looks right to me. But what I will say is that I'm going to throw it out there to you that if you're having problems with this set of prints and you're not getting any satisfaction from emailing them and saying, I have this problem, what's going on, then by all means, please comment on the video and I will do my utmost to help you out and try to give you dimensions as I can. I'm not going to give you a set of prints, that's not how I work, but I will help you along and try to clear up any questions that you have. So I'm going to throw it out there as I always have. Feel free. If you have a question, comment below and I'd be more than happy to help you if I can. You know, that's what this show is all about, helping everybody get through their projects, helping newcomers as well as guys that have been at it for a while. It's helping everybody. That's the purpose of my show. So comment your questions and I'll do what I can for you. And there you have it. A roll top desk. Guys, I have absolutely enjoyed every minute of this build. Some of it was back-breaking work. It was a heck of a lot of fun. It really was. I love the desk. I love the build. I love working at the desk. I love all the extra space that I've got. I love the LEDs. I love the design. I love the classic look. I love that satin finish. I didn't want that bright shine and it doesn't have it, and I love the way it came out. I can't say enough about how much I really love this final product. Regardless of the problems that we had through the build with some of the dimensions and that sort of thing, I really can't say enough about the whole project in general. I hope that at some point in time you guys are going to take this on and make one for yourself, because this, for me anyway, and all of my woodworking over the years, this is the one piece that I want to carry on for years after I'm gone. So this is kind of my legacy sort of thing to pass on through the generations, and I hope that it lives up to that expectation. As far as the finish, a very risky move for me to try the sealer and to try this water-based satin varnish that I had never used before. Very risky move to try it on a project of this magnitude. But it worked out really well, and I love the finish. I love the application. I love the short dry time. It's beautiful. It is an absolutely wonderful product, and I really enjoyed working with it, and I love the results that I got, and it will now be my go-to for things like this when I need that satin look on a project. Give it a try. If you're looking for a new type of finish, the application was easy, and I don't know, guys. I can't say enough about it. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the project. I enjoyed the finish. And that's it for this one. I'm going to wrap it up. And guys, I want to thank you for joining me. What more can I say other than I'm going to see you here next week with yet another woodworking video. Thanks for joining me, guys.